I was scared.
Sure.
I don't think I wanted to fail, and I didn't want to take a risk and not step out. At the time, we're all insecure in certain areas if we really want to admit that. And it took a remarkable opportunity that woke me up to realize I'm ready.
Welcome to Beyond the Blueprint, powered by Contractors, Closers, and Connections, Orlando. Join me for in-depth interviews with some of the top commercial real estate and development executives in the industry. We uncover their success stories, their strategies, and their lessons learned along the way. Gain valuable insight whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out. From a young man in Ohio all the way down to the market of Orlando to developing the Mall of Millennia and all the outparcels around it, we sit down with Brian Grandstaff at Millenia-Partners to get to know some of his stories, how he got to where he is today, and the challenges along the way. Join us for part 1 of 2 at the Beyond the Blueprint podcast. Brian, thanks for joining us here on the Beyond the Blueprint podcast here in Orlando. We're super excited to have you. There has been a ton of value that you've brought to my life, and the different types of relationships from a employer standpoint, from a mentor, from a friend, even a workout partner, and you've opened your arms wide, not only in mentor and business, but also in your family. So I'm very grateful for that. But I'm excited to have you here and kind of open the net and let our audience know who you are, what you're about, and some of the great stories that you have. So we're going to go ahead and get you started on your origin story, where you came from back in Ohio. So we'll kind of get started there, and you kind of take it away.
Absolutely. I'm really humbled. I grew up on a small farm in central Ohio, just north of Columbus, and ended up on a mission field in East Asia. It's on let's say Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia. Met the chairman of the board of directors for this ministry after college, and he happened to be a real estate developer. And so the opportunity to come down and work for a man that was incredibly successful, that loved God and had this amazing family. And quite frankly, if you grew up or if you're familiar with Ohio, I just couldn't wait to get into the sunshine and near some water.
There now.
Exactly. It's gray, it's rainy, it's just awful. But it is my home, and I'm honored to have grown up on the farm. But honestly, I love Orlando and Florida and everything that Florida has to provide.
So you got here, you got connected to your mentor, who was also a mentor for me. So
I know.
Through our story has been a lot similar. But so you got here. How did you get to Florida? So coming from Ohio, getting to Florida.
Well, I hopped in my Honda Accord when Mike called and said I had the job in June of 1995, and drove straight here. And I don't think I gave him my resume. I didn't have a job description. It didn't matter. It was old-fashioned mentoring and kind of Knights of the Round Table stuff. And the funny part was, after I drove all the way here, he offered me a place to stay at his house and woke me up the next day, handed me keys to a Suburban, and told me to take his boat and his Suburban up to some friends in North Carolina. So, it was a beginning of a very, very wild ride that every single day was different than the next. And it was one of those tests that he was giving me the opportunity to be a good steward of these valuable vehicles in this boat, but at the same time, it was being willing to do whatever he asked me to do.
Sure. So he brought you to Ohio. He was just more or less testing you out. Is that from?
I think
bringing
so.
The boat out.
I think so. He wanted to know at what level I'll be willing to follow, and I found in my own life that has been a huge advantage. The ability to have trust and respect for your mentor and your boss is really, really paramount. And I'm honored again to be friends with him today, and seriously to have him part of the company is just amazing.
So you're in Ohio. You're an ambitious young man getting into the real estate game. So what does that look like? You're in a new city, don't really know anyone.
You mean when I'm down here in Orlando?
Yeah, in Orlando.
Sorry, yeah. It was humbling, because the first part of the job that I did with Mike was property management. And I thought, this is easy. And I remember one of the first things he taught me was going out and telling the landscaper exactly how, if this were my house, if this were my property, this is how I would want you to cut the grass, and to follow up and hold him accountable was something that he found to be really an important trait. And then from there, I learned how to act as if I owned everything that we ever managed or we ever took care of or brokered. And so it was an interesting principle.
Yeah, that's interesting. That that ownership, taking ownership of the things. Even if you're representing clients or you're hired by someone, but taking that full ownership. I think there's a lot of perspective there. Not only from your day-to-day job, but also like how you do things. I think a lot of times people don't have a spirit of excellence if they don't take complete ownership.
Sure.
So could you speak more about that principle?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge was you are insecure, you don't understand exactly what you're doing, you're being tasked with something that, quite frankly, was at times beyond your grasp or comprehension. But there was this grit, this roll up your sleeves, we're going to figure it out, even if it takes all day. And so he was very kind to give me the opportunity to have ownership and handling the construction company. We ran a small real estate development company. We did property management. But I was a broke single guy in my early 20s. I needed work, and so I ended up cleaning toilets and doing janitorial work in those offices. I asked him, outside of wearing my starched, white shirt and handing out checks to all the contractors,
Sure.
I would then go after work on a Friday as they're drinking beer and hanging out at the job site. I'd clean up because I needed the money, and so I learned very early how working multiple jobs and never taking opportunity of work for granted, and really recognizing that, this world's not going to hand you opportunities. You've got to go out and you got to really want it.
Sure. Especially coming into a brand new market, not having a ton of connections.
Yeah, you know what that is.
Just learn. I mean, it's a grind, just kind of getting connected from the start. So you get involved with Mike here in Orlando. You're in property management. The next thing is getting involved with your next mentors, right? So that's that. Go ahead and speak to that.
Well, it was a really fortunate circumstance. He had the opportunity to meet a need that I had, which was I tasted real estate. I fell completely in love with it, and I couldn't do enough of it.
Sure.
And so he was at the time handling his very large family, and he was kind of moving some things around, and I was really excited to do more in real estate. And he said, look, I'll give you a great recommendation. At the same time, maybe I'll make a phone call. And he calls Steve Scrimshire, and it was phenomenal. Steve sat me down, said, Brian, what you don't understand is the relationship that you have with him, I also have with him, and now I have with you. And I'm like, oh my God, what does that mean? This is like The Godfather. And and he's like, well, I need you to meet some people. And he writes a card out, and this is all before these guys had computers. Literally, everything was on an index card that they wrote out, and they were handling multi-million-dollar deals. And there were like 10, 12 guys he wanted me to meet. And I had no idea. I remember the first guy I went to meet with, his name was Bill Moss. I had no idea who this guy was. And I roll into the Signature building, and, this happened to be on the top floor. And I guess there's this guy, Bill Moss, and no clue. He's the head of C.B. Richard Ellis and a legend in this town. But he didn't offer me a job.
Right. You're like, why am I here?
Why am I here? And what they were doing is he was constantly giving me exposure to what commercial real estate and what some of the legends in Central Florida were doing. And then I came back, and I'm like, Steve, thank you so much, but nobody offered me a job. What the hell? And he's like, well, I want you to know, I was interviewing you through them, and I'd like you to meet my partner. And so John Reif showed up in Winter Park, and that was back in 1997, and I had no clue. Again, very little job description. I didn't know he owned anything that ultimately became Millennia, and he and Steve were fraternity brothers, and they would introduce me to another guy by the name of Jim Willard, who's an amazing attorney here in town, and these three families would completely reshape my real estate career.
Sure. So it's interesting that, Mike had you drive the boat in the Suburban up to test what you were doing, and Steve had you interview with a bunch of other guys.
Yeah.
So you're working your way up. You're not driving down.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're getting at the top floor. And
yeah.
so, in a way, they're both kind of testing you out, trying to figure out, are you going to be the proof in the pudding and have what it takes?
Absolutely.
So that's an interesting parallel there. So you get to you're working with John, and you're getting into Millennia, and so what's that experience like? It's a major development here in town.
Well, what was crazy is, most of the guys that I've had the opportunity to work for over the years, they've always had far more than I would have ever thought or knew. And so I didn't even know Millennia existed. I mean, I was taking care of, he was doing some out parcel development, owned a couple shopping centers, and I was his assistant. I mean, I think for the first year, I just carried the man's bag around and just did whatever he asked me to do. I was a finance major. I was married at the time. I was a grown man, but it's just humbling because you just don't go to school to learn how to be a real estate developer.
Sure.
There's just that type of education is only gotten with real commitment and mentoring, and he saw that. He threw everything at me, and I couldn't let go. Like, give me more. I'll do whatever you need me to do. So ultimately the real remarkableness was Millennia was what it is. Obviously today, none of us really completely saw that. Maybe John did, as he drove down I-4 and sketched it on a napkin. But
you're coming in from Ohio, and you're like, Millennia, Rolex, Cartier.
I know. It was amazing.
It's all these extra brands.
But I think the beauty for me was it gave me this wide experience in development as well as leasing and sales. Ultimately led to management, and it was the most comprehensive education I could possibly have gotten. It took about 7 or 8 years, but it really did. It was what God provided to get me to be able to start my own company and really take off.
Sure. So it's interesting that we go through, different stages of life and how they kind of slowly connect to each other. A lot of people say, relationships aren't transferable, but in a way they are, right? So in a way, you're having one relationship with one guy, he's connected to another guy. Yep. It's almost like this atom that's just built together. And I know, from our experience in our relationship, I've been able to see the fruit of that.
Yeah.
So it's cool to see that. So you finish, you're in Mall of Millennia, you're working with Steve, and you're working with those guys, and John, and that different development. And so what makes you go start Millennia?
To be quite frank, I probably could have seen God directing my path more than once, but I was scared. Sure. I don't think I wanted to fail, and I didn't want to take a risk and not step out. At the time, we're all insecure in certain areas if we really want to admit that. And it took a remarkable opportunity that woke me up to realize I'm ready.
Right.
And transparently, there a remarkable opportunity. It was two guys that run pretty significant companies today. We're both working at a small company called Trammell Crow, and they offered me the opportunity to run McDonald's, Bank of America, and ExxonMobil in Central North Florida as their corporate real estate broker. Right. And I asked what the guy was making prior to me, and they said pretty much 5 times what you're currently making right now. And I realized,
I'm missing out.
Okay, all right, well, I guess I've got the education, I've got the knowledge, and this is the opportunity. And I couldn't do it. I went in, I talked to my mentor. It's a great story. He looked at me and he's like, yeah, you're totally worth that. And I'm like, and he's like, I told you weren't making any more than X working for me. So. Sure. And I recognized, like, yeah, that's right. I mean, he paid me in education, and he paid me in visibility and networking, and our deal was, I'm not going to make a lot of money with him, but he's going to give me this opportunity to really make it on my own. So 24 hours after the job offer, and I sit and do breakfast with these two guys, I just prayed about it, talked to my wife, and came back, and I said, you know what? I'm going to start my own company. And I came in and told my mentor that, and he kind of laughed at me. He's like, oh, yeah. And oh, yeah. And guess what? And we're going to finish Millennia together as well. Right. And he's like, oh, yeah? And I'm like, yeah. And so ultimately I said, why would you care? I'm a broker. Let me go be a broker. I'm going to start my own company. We're going to go rent space I joked about it. It was like, what was the least threatening thing for, Mr. Millennia, the guy that's developed all this? And it was like brokering a Vietnamese nail salon. Right. And oddly enough, those were like my first 3 deals I did. But he gave me such great encouragement by saying, you know what, that sounds like a win-win. Let's finish Millennia. That's what we got started. You want to do your own thing? All right. You've been loyal. You've been faithful for 7 years. You did everything I ever asked you to do. And it was the first hour of every single day. You took care of that.
Sure.
And so at the end of your week, if you got a few hours left and you're willing to work hard on the weekends, yeah, knock yourself out. Go do a few brokerage deals. I hope you're more successful than me one day.
Right. You know, that is very bold and humbling in a way that he, you know, said, hey, you want to do your own thing. Like, he was supporting you.
Yeah.
And he wanted to see you succeed. I think, you know, there's not a lot of people, I think, you know, in the world, but I know that in this industry, I've met quite a ton that want to see you succeed and that want to help and want to kind of get you to the next level.
All of my mentors mean a lot to me.
Sure.
And what I've learned over time is it's not easy. It's challenging because you gain a certain level of experience and now all of a sudden maybe you know as much as they do or even more. But all of the men that God has brought into my life since I got to Florida have been incredibly, well, they've just been a blessing to me. And so it is a huge accomplishment to be able to start my own company, to be able to finish the aspects of Millennia and to honestly keep the relationship with him.
Sure.
And quite frankly, their kids. I consider it an honor that most of their kids are friends of mine today.
Yeah, and there's a level of stewardship that was taking place, you know, from the start of you meeting Mike in Ohio all the way to getting to Orlando, doing Millennia, going out on your own, and those guys giving you the opportunity to go out on your own and also not be threatened at the same time.
Yeah, the principle of, you know, be faithful with little, you'll be faithful of much was something that was very much impressed upon me, and it never really came together like I envisioned, but quite frankly, it is so much bigger and better than I could have ever imagined.
Sure. Well, you know, that's a very good story, and I know that a lot of our listeners are very adamant about hearing the background, right? So,
Sure.
You know, understanding where some of these developers, architects, engineers, brokers, anybody in this commercial space, how they got to where they got. And so I really appreciate you.
Well, one of the things I really think it's important, because again, we've got, you know, young people in the company that work with us, and it's the ability to stay committed for a significant period of time in order to actually get the education and the experience. And when I added up, I think it was like 7-8 years I was with those guys before I started the company, and then I continued for another year or two after that. And that amount of time definitely gave me the confidence once I saw that job offer that, you know what, it's time. Let's roll. And even in some of the areas of development, which we can talk about later, you know, I had recognized I have done this type of transaction, this type of development deal, not just 10 times, not just 20 times, but 50, 75 times. It's now time to do it for myself. Because I knew the risks associated. I knew I'd be able to take care of my financial partners and we'd be able to do this. So that would probably be one of the biggest things I'd share with your listeners, is just making sure that you take the time to get that experience and have it validated by other people. Because we're all looking at the mirror. It's like, yeah, I'm a pretty good singer.
Yeah. Right.
No, you're not.
In the car.
Exactly.
Brian, that was amazing. I really appreciate you sharing that. I am super thrilled that all of our listeners got to see just where you started, where you came, how you got there. We are going to go in round 2 where we talk about some of your development, Millenia-Partners, the success, and the pitfalls that came along the way. And so I'm super thrilled. For our listeners, where can they find you? Where can they get connected to you or even work with Millennia?
Well, actually, yeah, just go to our website.
Sure.
Millenia, Millenia.partners.com is the best place to find us, and search our team and check all of us out. We'd really appreciate that.
He's got a rockstar team, so make sure you check that website out. Just newly redone. So,
yes.
So
rebranded.
We're rebranded into the next century. So everybody stay tuned for part 2, and we will see you next time.